The doctor's words hung in the air like a death sentence. "I'm sorry, Mr. Collins. We can only save one of them." James Collins felt his world collapse as he stared at the ultrasound monitor, where 2 tiny heartbeats flickered. His wife was gone, taken by cancer just months ago, and now this impossible choice stood before him. How could any parent decide which child deserves to live? Before we continue this heartbreaking journey, if you're moved by this story, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share more powerful stories like James's that remind us of the strength of the human spirit in the face of impossible choices. James Collins never imagined he'd be raising his 5-year-old daughter Lily alone. At 34, he had built the perfect life with his college sweetheart, Sarah. They had a beautiful home in the suburbs, promising careers, and their precious daughter. Sarah's diagnosis came without warning: aggressive ovarian cancer that took her within 8 months. James was still drowning in grief when he met Catherine. Catherine Pierce was the grief counselor who helped Lily process her mother's death. With her warm smile and gentle manner, she slowly became a friend to James as well. Neither expected their connection to blossom into romance, but life has a way of surprising us when we're at our most vulnerable. Catherine brought light back into their home, making Lily laugh again and helping James believe that perhaps happiness wasn't permanently beyond his reach. When Catherine discovered she was pregnant, it felt like a miracle, a new beginning. The pregnancy had been progressing normally until the 20-week scan revealed complications. Catherine had developed a rare condition that was causing severe placental issues with the twins she carried. The doctors explained that attempting to save both babies would almost certainly result in losing Catherine and both children. Their only option was selective reduction, saving one twin to give Catherine and that baby the best chance of survival. "How am I supposed to make this choice?" James whispered, his voice breaking as he sat in the sterile hospital consultation room. Catherine lay in a hospital bed 2 floors above, unaware of the devastating news he'd just received. The specialist had called him down alone to explain the situation, knowing the stress could further endanger Catherine. Dr. Patel, a maternal-fetal medicine specialist with kind eyes that had seen too much tragedy, placed her hand on James's shoulder. "I know this is impossible, Mr. Collins. But we need a decision within 48 hours. The longer we wait, the greater the risk to Catherine." James stumbled out of the hospital into the cool autumn air, his mind racing. How could he tell Catherine? How could he choose between their unborn children? And what about Lily? She had already lost her mother. He couldn't bear the thought of her losing Catherine too, who had become like a second mother to her. That night, after putting Lily to bed with a forced smile and a bedtime story, James sat alone in his kitchen, staring at old photographs. Sarah smiled back at him from their wedding day, her eyes full of the future they'd planned together. "What would you do?" he whispered to her image. "How do I make this choice?" The next morning, James called his parents. His mother wept quietly on the phone while his father, a retired surgeon, tried to offer clinical perspective that did nothing to ease the burden. His sister flew in that afternoon to stay with Lily while James returned to the hospital. Catherine's face crumpled when he finally told her the truth. "Both of them?" she asked, her hands protectively covering her swollen belly. "We'll lose both of them if we don't choose." James nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "Then we have to save one," Catherine said with surprising clarity through her tears. "We have to give one of our babies a chance to live." The medical team presented them with what little information they had. Twin A, slightly larger and with marginally better positioning, might have a slightly higher chance of survival. Twin B had shown a minor heart irregularity on the last scan, though the doctors emphasized it could be temporary. There was no clear medical reason to choose one over the other. That night, Catherine slept fitfully under sedation while James kept vigil by her bedside. His mind tortured him with impossible scenarios. Would the surviving twin somehow know? Would they grow up wondering about their sibling? Would he and Catherine look at their child and always see the shadow of the one they couldn't save? As dawn broke, James stepped out into the hospital garden. A light rain was falling, matching the tears on his face. He thought about Lily, who had already endured so much loss in her young life. He thought about Catherine, whose kindness had saved him from drowning in grief. And he thought about the tiny lives depending on his decision. The weight of responsibility was crushing. James had always prided himself on being logical, on finding solutions to problems. But there was no logical solution here, only heartbreak in every direction. When he returned to Catherine's room, she was awake, her eyes red-rimmed but calm. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about what Sarah would want." James froze at the mention of his late wife's name. "She would want us to choose life, James. As much life as possible. She would want us to protect Lily from more loss." Catherine took his hand. "I want to try to save both," the doctors said. "I know what they said," Catherine interrupted. "But they also said there's a small chance, very small, that if they try an experimental procedure, they might save both babies, though the risks to me would increase significantly." James felt his heart constrict. "I can't lose you too." "You might not. And if the worst happens?" Catherine's voice broke. "Lily will still have you. Our babies will still have you." James spent the next hours in agonizing deliberation, consulting with multiple specialists, seeking second and third opinions. One doctor, a researcher from Johns Hopkins who reviewed Catherine's case remotely, suggested a modified approach that might slightly improve the odds of saving both twins while minimizing additional risk to Catherine. As the deadline for their decision approached, James found himself in the hospital chapel, not praying. He'd lost his faith when Sarah died, but seeking quiet to make the most important decision of his life. A hospital chaplain, an elderly woman with silver hair and a gentle voice, sat down beside him. "Sometimes there are no right answers," she said simply. "Only choices made with love." When James returned to Catherine's room, his decision was made. He would not choose between their children. They would attempt the modified procedure the Johns Hopkins doctor had suggested, accepting the slightly elevated risk to Catherine in exchange for the chance, however small, of saving both twins. The procedure was scheduled for the following morning. James spent the night at Catherine's bedside, both of them whispering hopes and fears and promises to each other and to their unborn children. Lily came to visit before the surgery, her small face solemn as James explained that the doctors were going to try to help Catherine and the babies. "Like they tried to help Mommy?" she asked, and James felt his heart break all over again. "Yes, sweetheart," he managed. "But this is different. The doctors think they can help." The surgery lasted 7 hours. James paced the waiting room until his sister forced him to sit down. When Dr. Patel finally emerged, her surgical mask hanging around her neck, James couldn't read her expression. "Catherine is stable," she said, and James felt his knees weaken with relief. "We were able to complete the procedure. One twin is doing well. The other..." She paused. "The other is struggling, but still with us. The next 24 hours will be critical." For the next day, James barely left the hospital. Catherine remained sedated while the medical team monitored her and the twins constantly. Twin B's heartbeat weakened several times, rallying each time the doctors were about to intervene. On the second day after surgery, James was dozing in a chair beside Catherine's bed when he felt her hand squeeze his. Her eyes fluttered open. "The babies?" she whispered. "Both still with us," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "They're fighters, like their mother." Catherine's recovery was slow. She remained hospitalized on bed rest for the remainder of her pregnancy. The twins, both boys, continued to develop, though Twin B remained smaller and showed signs of distress periodically. Every day was a battle to keep them both alive inside Catherine long enough to have a chance outside. At 30 weeks, Catherine went into premature labor. The twins were delivered by emergency C-section, Ethan at 3 pounds, 4 ounces, and Noah at just 2 pounds, 7 ounces. Both were immediately rushed to the NICU. The following weeks were a blur of hospital visits, dividing time between Catherine's recovery room and the NICU, and trying to maintain some normalcy for Lily. James's parents moved in temporarily to help, and his sister took a leave of absence from her job. Friends from their community organized meal deliveries and childcare for Lily. Ethan, the stronger twin, began to thrive relatively quickly. Noah struggled more, requiring surgery to repair a heart defect and fighting off multiple infections. There were nights when the doctors prepared James for the worst, telling him to say goodbye to his smallest son. But each time, Noah clung to life. 2 months after their birth, Ethan was strong enough to go home. Leaving Noah behind in the hospital was one of the hardest things James and Catherine had ever done. They established a rotation, ensuring one of them was always with Noah while the other cared for Ethan and Lily at home. Noah remained in the hospital for another 3 months. When he finally came home, he was still small and fragile, requiring oxygen support and regular medical visits. But he was alive. The first year was exhausting. Between Noah's medical needs, Ethan's typical infant demands, and ensuring Lily didn't feel forgotten, James and Catherine barely slept. Their relationship was tested in ways they never imagined. There were arguments born of exhaustion, tears shed in private moments of overwhelm, and doubts about whether they had made the right choice. But there were beautiful moments too. The first time Noah smiled. The day Ethan reached out to touch his brother's hand in their shared crib. Lily reading picture books to her baby brothers with careful concentration. On the twins' first birthday, a milestone the doctors had once thought Noah might never reach, James and Catherine held a small celebration at home. As they watched their 3 children together, Catherine leaned against James's shoulder. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we'd made a different choice?" she asked quietly. James looked at Noah, still smaller than his brother but sitting up independently now, his eyes bright as he smashed cake between his fingers. "Every day," he admitted. "But then I look at them, and I know we couldn't have chosen differently." By the twins' second birthday, Noah had caught up to his brother in most developmental milestones, though he remained smaller and more susceptible to respiratory infections. The heart defect he was born with had been successfully repaired, and his doctors were optimistic about his long-term prognosis. Lily, now 8, had become fiercely protective of her younger brothers, especially Noah. She proudly told anyone who would listen about how her baby brother was a miracle. On a warm summer evening, as the family sat in their backyard watching the twins chase fireflies with Lily's help, Catherine took James's hand. "I never thanked you," she said. "For what?" "For refusing to make an impossible choice. For fighting for both of them when everyone said it couldn't be done." James shook his head. "It was your courage, not mine. You were willing to risk everything." "We both were," Catherine corrected him. "And look what we gained." 5 years after that fateful day in the doctor's office, the Collins family celebrated another milestone, Catherine and James's wedding. They had postponed marriage during the medical crises and early challenges, focusing instead on survival and recovery. Now, with all 3 children healthy and thriving, they were finally ready to formalize the bond that had been forged in the crucible of their shared ordeal. Lily, now 10, served as flower girl, while the 5-year-old twins toddled down the aisle as ring-bearers, Noah only slightly smaller than his brother now. In the front row sat Dr. Patel and several other medical professionals who had become like family during their journey. During their vows, James spoke words that brought tears to every eye in the congregation. "When faced with an impossible choice, you taught me that sometimes the bravest decision is to reject the limitations others place upon us. You showed me that love doesn't divide when shared, it multiplies. Our family is living proof of that miracle." Life wasn't perfect. Noah still required more medical attention than most children his age. The financial strain of his ongoing care was significant, even with insurance. There were still nights when James woke in a cold sweat from nightmares about what might have been. But these challenges were balanced by immeasurable joy. On the twins' 7th birthday, James found himself looking through old photographs, a habit he'd developed on significant dates. Among them was a picture taken in the NICU, his hand reaching through the incubator port to touch Noah's tiny foot, smaller than his thumbnail. Lily found him there, studying the photo. "Dad? Mom says it's time for cake." James smiled at his daughter, now 12 and beginning to show glimpses of the young woman she would become. "I'll be right there." "Is that Noah when he was born?" she asked, peering at the photograph. "Yes. The doctors didn't think he would make it." Lily was quiet for a moment. "I remember being scared a lot back then. But you always told me everything would be okay." "I hoped it would be," James admitted. "I couldn't know for sure." "But you didn't give up," Lily said with the simple wisdom of children. "That's what matters, right?" In that moment, James realized that perhaps the most important lesson his children would learn from their family's journey wasn't about medical miracles or beating the odds. It was about refusing to accept impossible choices, about fighting for hope even when it seemed foolish, about the strength that comes from facing heartbreak together rather than alone. As he joined his family around the birthday cake, watching the twins blow out their candles in perfect synchrony, something they'd somehow always been able to do, James felt a sense of peace wash over him. The doctor had said only one would survive, but James had made the decision that love demanded, to fight for both, to hope for both, to make room in his heart for all possibilities rather than closing doors before they had even opened. That decision, made in grief and fear and desperate hope, had given them this moment, this family, this life built from the ashes of what they had lost and the courage to believe in what might still be possible. If you've been moved by James and Catherine's journey, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories of courage, hope, and the extraordinary strength of ordinary people facing impossible choices. Remember, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is refuse to choose between loves, between hopes, between possibilities, and instead, fight for them all.